Usually waiting in line for jobs, and now there are people trying to decide if they want to have a job.
Yeah. We won't go down that path of why we think that's the case.
Well, there are lots of reasons. Yeah, we should probably especially after I did
Recording in progress.
We're at 4:00.
Okay. Got it.
I don't know where Our Lady was.
I'm assuming Fred will kick us off, right?
I have no idea.
You've been live for the last 45 seconds. No, folks, that's not a problem. That's not your silence. It's just our hosts and guests are being quiet. So don't adjust your volume. We are live. Hopefully somebody will start talking soon.
Maybe we just get started. But we need our music.
I was going to say, we don't have the lead.
We've been live for about 2 minutes now, folks. So please talk.
Okay, well, welcome to another episode of Pillars of Franchising. We'd like to welcome our special guest co-host, Miss Sarah Spain from Maid of Aurora. Good afternoon, Sarah. Happy Friday Eve.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get started with our word on the street. I understand you've got some burning questions, Sarah.
Sure. So I'm a mom and I have little kids. You have older kids. So tell me about working, like owning a franchise as a mom, and why it's, to me, when I'm reading about it, seems awesome. Like I have some ideas, but what do you think, like, getting into that opposed to working for like a big company or owning like a small like individual store, which sounds terrifying. Like why a franchise is so good compared to that.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I had what was really kind of considered a great situation with a corporate job, Monday through Friday, kind of normal hours, easy to and flexible enough to pick up and drop the kids off from daycare. But I'll tell you what really became a problem were sick days and room parties and all these other things that come up, right? And so doctor's appointments. And so the great thing about owning a franchise, and it really depends, again, this is where it becomes really important that you identify what it is that you're looking for out of a franchise, because maybe you're somebody who says, I want to stay home all day while my husband works, and then I want to work evenings so that he can watch the kids while I go do my thing, right? That's a different kind of franchise that you're looking for.
Right.
But in general, the great thing about franchising for moms, working moms in particular, is that you have a lot of flexibility, right? So you're not necessarily numbered on the number of sick days you have. You don't necessarily have to ask your boss if you need to run to a room party that lasts for 45 minutes in the middle of the day. You have ultimate control over your schedule. So that's one of the things that I found to be super helpful with 3 kids. And when we started, my youngest actually was born about 9 months into opening the business.
Oh,
so,
wow.
So I've been through where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
and now he's a freshman in high school. So what other questions do you have?
Yeah, I don't even think I had a brain 9 months postpartum. So
well, mine could have been questioned, I think.
Yeah. And just being here right now, I can hear like my kids saying, Mom, where are you? I'm like, no, I'm busy.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I worked at a job beforehand with kids, and it was a small company, small business. So when I left for maternity leave, they were just on their own. They had nobody else. So they were like, what's going on? What's happening? When are you coming back? When are you coming back?
Yeah.
So, working for one is awesome.
Yeah. And, and the thing is too, so when I put my kids into daycare, even though I owned my own business, right, you still have to be able to come to work and somebody has to take care of them. So we had an au pair, we've had babysitters, we put them in daycare. And the coolest thing that I met was a family whose kids were the same age as mine, and they owned a Goddard school franchise. So their kids were there at school, at work with her as she ran the daycare. And she knows the teachers, obviously she hires them, right? And so that worked out really well for her. And there's a lot of models that allow you to have semi-absentee ownership and or situations in which you could bring your kids. There's a lot of work from home scenarios that aren't really bad franchises to look into if you want to go that route. I can tell you it tends to save a lot of money if you can find a situation where you have that flexibility. But again, it's all about talking to a broker about what is the right model for the lifestyle that you want and the way that you want to raise your kids.
Right. So you don't need to be completely you can delegate things.
Sure,
out,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So good. I hope we answered all of your questions.
Oh yeah.
Okay, good. So moms out there, as we approach Mother's Day, let's not forget that franchising is a great option as you transition out of the corporate world, as you look for more freedom, as you struggle with, just a few days off that you have, the flexibility of going to Halloween parties and spring fling parties and all those other things. Take a look and consider, maybe put on your Mother's Day wish list, a franchise. Why not? And we got a great show. We got a great show for you all coming up today. We're going to talk to our panel of pros and talk about some other franchising things. We'll be back right after this. Oh, we're back.
That was a quick transition.
It was great. Hey, we are on the ball today. No time to mess around.
That's right.
So let's get started. We want to talk today about why franchising, why everybody here, we all came from a different background, every single one of us. And I want to understand what drew each one of you into the franchising sphere, so to speak. Karen, let's start with you.
What's interesting, because my journey consisted of in my 30s, in my early 30s, where I did a startup. I actually had a startup that was not a franchise, and it was a professional services company, and was part of the startup. Spent like 10 years growing it, and I was like, "Oh, who needs franchises? We did this, and we've got the scars to show it, and we had that growth." Well, then fast forward, I'm now part of. I was on the franchising side. It was a franchisor side. And then now on the franchisee side, I'm like, oh my gosh, who wouldn't want to have franchising or be a franchise? Because the differences are with the franchising, you almost don't have to learn your own mistakes many times. People before you have learned those mistakes. There are systems in place. There's marketing in place. So I really totally switched from why do I need this? And having, again, the scars to prove it, to, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't do franchising at the beginning.
Right. Well, that's a really good point, because I'm working with a candidate right now who said, listen, I owned my own business before. I wound up going back into the corporate world as an executive, but I don't want to go down that path again. I don't want to have to deal with all of those unknowns again. I want to start with a little bit of information and foundation behind me. So I think that's really a good point that you make. Jerry, how about you?
What about me, Kristin? Everybody wants to know about me. Well, corporate America, all of us kind of have a little bit of that background. I'd spent 25 years there developing companies for other people, moving around the country and so on. And then spent about 10 of my the last 10 years of my 25 in corporate, also doing consulting in that same category across the United States and Canada. And then, went into consulting full time and discovered franchising while I was doing business consulting. Bought my first one almost on a whim. Let's try this. I don't know a lot about it, but let's see how it works. And found out I absolutely loved it. It was, frankly, so much easier than, as Karen talked about, building it from the ground up and having all the scars to show for it. So then the scalability part of it came into play, and I decided that, with a franchise, you could scale it, way faster than you could ever think about doing your own bricks and mortar type thing. So I was sold, I was in, and when I go into something, it's 100%. So, we went from 0 to 100 really quick. And now we've got, as you know, 34 great clips and 5 the joint chiropractics. I'm a regional developer, and, franchising is my life now. So I recommend it to everyone.
So Jerry, how many did you start with? Did you start with a single unit?
Yes, we started with one and we bought it. It was an existing one. So we acquired it.
Wow.
And it was just because it was available. It wasn't that we were looking for an existing one. It was available. And, we did a pro forma. The numbers looked good. It was in hair. And I literally remember saying, I will never be in hair. When I was offered the opportunity, I said, not a chance, no way. And then we did validation calls with franchisees. We actually went to corporate and did a discovery day and spent time with some of the corporate people. And my wife, who's the skeptic in the family, we're driving back from Minneapolis from corporate, and she looked at me and she said, it sounds crazy, but I think it's the right thing to do. And frankly, we never looked back. We bought that one, turned it around in less than a year, almost doubled revenues in the first year, and then set out on a path to buy out others, and eventually bought the entire market and have added on since then.
Excellent. And so tell me, Karen, what about you? How did you start with one? I mean, I know your situation is a little bit different.
It is. It's one, we're, right now with, we're the Chicagoland area. So it's one of the largest single unit franchises in the US.
Uh-huh.
So, yes, it just started with one. And the same thing when I had my own company, we just had one. It was just a single unit, but we service the world. And I'll tell you, it's a lot easier working just here in the Chicagoland area than it is, working, with companies throughout the world. I mean, it's just a different focus, but yeah. Same thing. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I was going to say, Karen, you bring up a great point that we need to make here for people that are thinking about franchising or whatever. There are franchise systems where you're better off with only 1 or 2 units because you need to be more engaged. Maybe it's more of a professional thing that you yourself are the representative for it. I mean, there's a lot of variables. So some franchise systems are made for scalability. Some are a little more leaning towards having 1 or 2 or a small group. In fact, if you look at a few of the really successful ones out there, Chick-fil-A comes to mind. They want you to have 1, maybe 2 if you're lucky. Right. Crumble Cookie is very similar in that model, although I think they're evolving a little bit into more scalability. But still, there's some out there, and that's not a bad thing because sometimes you can take a franchise like that and make it huge, which is what you're doing, Karen. And so I don't want anybody out there to get the misperception that you've got to add 30 or 50 or something like that, because you can do exceptionally well with one of most franchises.
Absolutely.
That's
on,
a very good point.
Size of your market as well, right?
Yep. Laura, I know a bit of your background, but tell us how you, and as a legal person, a lawyer in franchising, how did you stumble into franchising when people, go to school for personal injury and corporate law? And
yeah, those are great points. So I knew, a little bit about business transactions, and being that kind of attorney, frankly, because my father is also this kind of attorney. But I never really knew when I went to law school that I was going to do the exact same thing, right? And, in some sense, it's kind of a joke, but it's like, we are our own little franchise, right? Yeah. You have parent child, right? And if you do the same thing, you just kind of passed it along. So, there's no good real answer. I mean, I ended up doing it originally out in Denver because I went to law school at the University of Denver. And really enjoyed it out there. As you may know, right? Colorado and Denver in particular is a extremely booming market for development. Colorado Springs in particular is usually one of the most popular test markets for franchisors because there's people all across the country who come there because of the military presence that's there. And so there's really a lot of franchise growth in the state and just generally entrepreneurial growth in the state. And so, it was a really fun industry to work in when I was out there. And then about 4.5 years ago, I moved back to Chicago to kind of work together with my father. But it is probably 70 or 80% of what we do every day is something franchise related. Whether it's writing a franchise disclosure document, reviewing it for a candidate. I had someone today, upset that, a franchisor is not approving the site that they want to put their business at. So I'm, looking at the agreement to see if they have any leverage, which they really don't. It is usually franchisors don't like to disapprove a site. That's kind of that's the last option. So if disapproved it, it's probably there are reasons, but all of those kind of things, right? And so it's a really fun and positive part of law to be in because most franchisees, they're very excited. They're starting out to do something new, or they're in a very, growth mindset. And it's a fun energy to be around as an attorney, right? I'm not doing divorces, right? I don't have to worry about, my voicemail and, so-and-so did such and such with the kids. We need a restraining order, terrible, horrible things. And I'm glad there are attorneys that help with those things. But I'm also very glad that I get to hang out with the franchise community because it's much more fun for me.
I think that's a really good point. And for those of you out there who are, considering going to law school, I do think it's an underrepresented area of law that not a lot of schools really focus on. We obviously, we work with the Titus Center, and Yum Brands has a place down in St. Louis, Kentucky, I believe. Jerry, help me out if I'm incorrect or wrong.
Louisville.
Thank you, Louisville. And I know Babson College has something going on. And so there are 3 or 4 colleges that have concentrations in franchising. And so whether that you're going for a business degree or a law degree, it's very interesting to get into a franchising class as well, so that you at least have a little bit of understanding of what exactly that is. So let's talk a little bit about we had Sarah ask questions about moms and things having franchises. Jerry, how about you? I mean, you're a dad, you're a grandpa, you've got, a great family. How difficult was it for you opening franchises and having a young family at the time?
Well, just to clarify, our older daughter was already in college when we really got this going on, and she was staying in college. So she came home one day and went, "You did what? And what does that mean to my, inheritance and those kinds of things?" Our younger daughter was in high school yet, and she actually spent summers doing payroll with my wife, and it was a great experience. She was going to go to college to be a physician, and actually did. Now that I'm thinking about it, but she discovered 2 things. She discovered she loved the franchise world. She loved working in the family business and she said many times, I have control over my own destiny when I do this, as opposed to having a job. Right. And then she ran into a little issue with pre-med biology in college. So she changed her major, and she majored in human resources and accounting and things that were going to be good for our business. So, but the reason you're bringing it up is because of time. And so I owned several other businesses when my kids were young. And the beauty of that, whether it's a franchise or another business, is you are your own boss. And many times you can do your job from anywhere with an iPad or your phone or whatever. So even though I worked like 80 hours a week, it allowed me to work whatever my hours when I wanted to. So if I needed to go to a baseball game, a softball game, a play, a musical, well, I'm just going to sign out for that period of time and shut my phone off. And then I might be working at 10 o'clock at night, sending emails or something like that. But I don't mind, because you have total control. You do it when you have time, and still be able to live your best life. So I honestly think, owning a franchise is phenomenal for family growth. And, you can talk about not only what it does in the time factor, which I just mentioned, but frankly, you probably will do better financially owning a franchise or 2 or 3 franchises than you would in a job, which leads to a different family lifestyle for many people. And you also bring into play a second generation thing, which Laura talked about. We're in the midst of. So our kids and perhaps our grandkids someday will be running this business, which is our legacy. So I think there's lots of positive things about the family involvement.
Yeah. Karen, what about you? Were your kids ever involved in your businesses at all?
My kids were not. They kind of chose different paths. And I will tell you at the same time,
Right.
my daughter spent a lot of time, in kind of like in the office with me.
Mhm.
And it was great because it was great for me where I could pick and choose when I wanted to work. The kids were all there with me. It's so funny when my daughter got out of college and had her first job, someone actually said to her, you're a little different for your age group. Did your mother work? Did your mother, were you involved in that? Because she saw it. I mean, she saw it on a daily basis. And I think it just kind of probably just eked into her kind of her existence. And it really, I think, helped her prepare for a corporate life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting. And I think that the one thing people have to really think about when they start their business, mine is one of those right now too, where I've got one in college and one, soon on his way and the other one with a few years yet to go. But if you ask them, they're like, we're not really interested. Because really, who wants to say, I own a maid service or we clean toilets for a living, right? Like that's not really their dream job. But when they see the outcome of the hard work and what it affords you, once they mature, I'm hoping that they will be like, oh, you know what? That's not really such a bad idea. Because it's often not about the brand or the service or the thing. It's about what it affords you and you finding your own passion for whatever that business model happens to be.
Absolutely.
Well, Kristin, interestingly enough, as you all know, my older daughter, Sam, started a second generation group with Great Clips. And that's taken on a life of its own. And literally, it has these kids, and I say kids, but some of them are in their 40s, 45. But to me, that's a kid, I guess. But they literally talk every day. So we've got young people in the same business that we're in that in many cases, are smarter than their parents were. I know in my case, that's the deal. And they're talking every day and sharing best practices and discoveries today, real time. That are changing everybody's businesses around the United States in a positive manner. And so I think that second generation thing is in any business, but certainly in franchising is grossly overlooked. And frankly, one of the things that I tell franchisors when I talk to them is, you start that before you start some other things, because that's the future. So for us, it has been life-changing. And frankly, and Karen brought it up. Not every kid wants to go into their family's business. And Kristin, you mentioned it. Sometimes they discover that it's different. They go out and get a real job and discover, mom or dad didn't have to work this way, and they got flexibility to go to my ball games. How come I don't? And then they're starting to think about it. Well, literally, we've got franchisees in the system coming to me and saying, I got a kid that needs to be in, but they're not quite sold on it. And I say, listen, just have him or her talk to Sam.
Right.
Because Sam will answer their questions, deal with their insecurities or any other issues they've got, be a mentor for them. And it has literally, there are kids in the system right now that would not have been in were it not for the second generation group. So it's actually going to help solidify the franchisor long term, because of the transition. Instead of selling businesses, there's going to be a transition handing them down to kids. So there's a lot of positive things that comes out of that second generation.
That is so phenomenal. And it's in what you're teaching them even early is which is a great thing about franchising. It's building community. Because the more we have that franchising community amongst each other, that's where you get the best practices. That's where you're going to have the most growth. The ideas. I mean, to me, that keeps the brand and franchising alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when I talk to my candidates when they're looking to buy a franchise. I just had this conversation with someone, and I said, you have 2 kids. Do you think either one of them, would be interested in doing this? And you're looking for a brand right now. Is there one that you think would work for you, meet your financial goals, and be something your kids would be interested in helping with? Because then you've got this built-in buy-in, right? I think some of the issue is we, at 17, 18 years old, we send them off to college and say, okay, you have to tell us, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Exactly.
And they're like, I don't know, right? Like, I
Right.
still don't know, and I'm 52, you know? And so I think it's great that franchising allows that opportunity, like Sam did, Jerry. She went away to school and she came back because she decided what she was doing was just not what
Right.
she thought it was going to be, you know? And so for those of you out there, we certainly are in a time right now where we have people, an inordinate amount of people getting ready to sell and move on and start that second generation. You know, it's a good time for them to really think about what is the exit strategy going to be. So
Absolutely.
speaking of that, Jerry, we're going to talk in a few minutes about, you know, fighting for franchising with the IFA. But some of this, you know, what are your thoughts on helping groom that next generation? Do you have any ideas that perhaps is what we need to be looking at as a community?
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly building in them the skill sets to do what it takes, you know. And let's face it, one of the hardest things for any business owner, but certainly a franchisee bringing their child in, is their work ethic may or may not be what yours was. And so you may have to help them change that, or you may just have to become accustomed to them working differently than you work. And so neither one of those is good or bad. That's just something that you should consider as you move through it. So making sure they've got the skill sets, or helping them, you know, find the skill sets, whether it's mentoring with you or taking extra classes or whatever the case might be. I highly, highly suggest getting them involved with the corporate side. In other words, working with your franchisor, going to meetings and events almost immediately, even if they're quiet in the background for the first few months. Go to them. It's an interesting story about that. That's the way we brought our daughters into everything. They met the president, the CEO, the board and we had talked to them like we're talking to everybody here. And I remember Sam was at an event, a corporate event not too long ago, with one of the second generation kids. And Sam waved at like the corporate VP, and then got ready to go over and talk to him. And this young man that was with her says, "Wait, stop. What are you doing? They're corporate. Why?" Well, yes, but that's why I'm doing it. They're not only corporate, but they're a friend of mine, and we work better with that kind of a relationship than if you stand off. So I would suggest parents that are bringing their kids in, let them become acclimated to having a relationship with, having conversations with people at the corporate level, because corporate is interested in how you're transitioning your business too. Mm-hmm. And so them becoming more comfortable with the skill sets and, you know, the drives of your children, if that might be the path to follow, is important. And interestingly enough, we're going to talk in the next segment about IFA and some battles. And there's a battle that happened in Arkansas last week that was 100% because of arguments between franchisors and franchisees about the kids coming into the business and taking over.
See,
so more on that.
Oh, can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah. I mean, Karen, so what do you, there's something that you shared with me today. I'd like you to talk to the audience about, that Dale Carnegie offers, right in the same vein of what Jerry's saying, and getting teenagers and such ready for the workplace. Can you talk about that just a little bit? I think it's so cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that we offer is, it's called it's like Next Generation. And it's a kind of a Dale Carnegie course for teenagers and, you know, young adults, especially those that are in high school years. And it's really to prepare them for confidence. You know, Jerry, you talked about even speaking to people, you know, when you're talking about speaking to executives, being comfortable with that, being, you know, having that, that growth mindset within them, getting outside of themselves, relationships, the importance of relationships. So all these things that we're talking about, it really does set the stage for them to become better, if you want to call it, better equipped to enter college, the work world. So the more we can do, you know, I believe with these young adults to help them with that, it's going to set them on a better path.
Yeah. Well, I just thought it was so interesting.
Karen, tying what you said together with what I said, one other thing that I am very proud of my daughters being looked up to by first generation franchisees because of the skill sets they've got. They've become experts in certain things in running our business, that even people who don't have a second generation, who are the first generation, who started their business, are reaching out to our daughters to learn from them about things. And that one step beyond that is being able to get on stage or in front of a class when a convention is going on or something like that, and actually facilitate it in front of first and second generation at a young age. That builds their confidence. It builds their image, and not only their eyes, but also the eyes of their peers and so on. I think it's just phenomenal. So again, parents, when you're thinking about bringing a second generation in, don't stop at just their day-to-day operations. Help them spread their wings a little bit too.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because I remember one of the first things that happened when we had our Molly Maid conventions, like all the executives brought their kids too. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Like that really drove the family atmosphere. So Meg Roberts, I mean, we had her on a couple weeks ago at the Lash Lounge. She's so dynamic on stage, and she had two boys that were right there watching how amazing her mom did handle the crowds, remember names, speak in public. And then, there's several families, and I don't want to start naming them and then forgetting the names, but one that comes to mind, the Silva Nash family down in Arkansas, near you, Jerry. I mean, their son started going to these meetings long ago, and now he's running his own business. It's still the same franchise, but I mean, he is a force to be reckoned with. And I think that it's great. When these kids came, they were maybe 7, 8 years old or younger. And I thought, well, what do they do when we're in classes, right? Oh, they're at the pool and so-and-so's kids are watching them. And I'm like, oh, okay. I never did that. And now I kind of feel bad because now that my kids don't want to put their phones down, I'm going to start dragging them.
It's never too late. So
Never too late.
Yeah.
And I'm betting Laura has dealt with some of these transitions and the I call it the creep up. It's the first part of it when they're thinking about it, and a parent might go to Laura and say, I'm thinking about this. What's your advice?
Good point.
We do hear a fair number of those. And, even folks that, are beginning kind of with the end in mind, right? Where they will buy something like you were suggesting that, they think has a higher likelihood of their child being interested in it. Maybe the kid is working in marketing right now, but, they're going to kind of be in the background. They're going to be interested, etc. Even if they're not overtly doing it together. But I do think, the sooner you can get them involved and the sooner that the franchisor knows that they exist, all of those are good and important things that make it easier to have a transition that, goes well, one, but also that the franchisor feels comfortable with, right? It's not a surprise to them. It's not that kind of relationship. The franchisors don't really like surprises.
Well, that brings nobody really does, right? But it's not a great topic. It's a great topic, but nobody really wants to talk about it. What about in the event that the franchise owner passes unexpectedly?
No, that's true.
The child wants to take over the business. They're of age. How does the franchisor, from a legal perspective, and the family come to some kind of terms with that?
Yeah. So it depends on the franchise concept. I would say in most concepts, the family is still, whoever the family member is still going to have to qualify as a transferee, right? It's not okay that they get, a free approval just because they're, son, daughter, nephew, whatever. So it is important, if that's something that they think might happen, to get them involved from the beginning. One thing that we will try to negotiate, if it is a smaller franchise, when they bought in, is to get pre-approval in an addendum, right? To say that those transfers among family members, are pre-approved, at least within like one generation, right? Maybe not. We're not transferring to like a 7-year-old or something.
Sure. Yeah.
And also to say that they may not have to pay the transfer fee, because those can be, anywhere from 50% of an initial fee. I've seen some lately, surprising, but 100% of an initial fee actually. And, that on top of, already losing someone that they care about, and suddenly they need to come up with, $20,000, $60,000, can be a real tough thing. And it's already going to be complicated enough to actually transition all of the things related to the business, right? To manage that bit. But there's a lot of planning things, that can be done in advance, with different kind of buy-sell agreements and insurance and, ways to make it so that way everybody's more comfortable.
Is that
Well,
I'm sorry, Jerry, is that the same with a spouse as well?
It can be, yeah. It depends how involved the spouse is, and if the spouse has been subject to, the spouse may have already been on the franchise agreement, technically, depending
Right.
on what franchise system it is.
Yeah.
Even if they don't really consider the spouse involved. So in that situation, it may not be a transfer, quote unquote, because they were already on there. But if they were not on there, if it was just signed in the name of the company and then maybe the spouse signed as a guarantor, right? That's not the same as who the franchisee was. And so it may be the case that, if the spouse was not on there directly, that the spouse will have to qualify as a transferee. And those, there's good reasons for that. If somebody's spouse was never involved in the business, there's really no reason to give them preferential treatment.
Interesting. Jerry, I know you had a comment, and then we'll switch gears a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to say that was one of the benefits of us bringing our daughters in as minority owners early on, because we could get them approved while I'm on the right side of the sod. And then, they stay involved because they're involved in the day-to-day stuff. So corporate's already well aware of the transition. Hopefully it happens while I'm alive, but if I'm not, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be slowed down, because that was the plan and the corporate was aware of it. I have heard, and I'm sure Laura's got lots of stories, but I've heard certainly the other side of that, where somebody does pass unexpectedly and maybe doesn't even have a second signer on their checking account.
Yeah.
Which means they can't make payroll, which happens every week or two. And there have been some very, very depressing stories about that. So anybody that's getting into a franchise or any business needs to have some process set up where you've got somebody to back you up on several different areas. And if you're going to pass it down, have some of that pre-approved.
I have to say, this is probably one of the most important pieces of advice, certainly that we've talked about. And Laura, I thank you for that, because there's probably a lot of people out there who don't realize, you may have a will and all these other things, but when you're in a franchise relationship and we say to you when you're buying, listen, go see a franchise lawyer. This is a golden nugget of information that you need to make sure your attorney says, hey, let's see what happens. God forbid you pass.
Right. And estate planning is an important tool, right? It's part of this. Like having in your will, whatever you want to happen, saying that is a really important tool, but it's not necessarily going to mean that the franchisor has to follow that.
Yeah.
And so you have to take action during your life to make that more of a reality, just the way that Jerry's describing, right? Because if you don't, then it's, the franchisor is, they're surprised, they're confused, it's a very stressful time if someone, dies unexpectedly and there's no clear person to whom that transitions, no number two. And, that's the case in any business, right? Whether it's a franchise or not. But here, because of the franchisee-franchisor relationship, there's someone else kind of watching out for it. And, they need to know, as early as possible that someone else is going to be involved.
Well, I really thank all of you, because we try to do these panel discussions kind of with a loose outline so we can really kind of play off each other and topics that come up. And I hope that certainly, all of this I think was very valuable, but this last part about your planning for the future, Jerry stumbled into it before with one of his folks that he helped with developing. And you hear these stories all the time. So I hope that you all out there, if you don't have something in place today, you go back, get your attorney and figure out what you can do to help protect yourself.
And I was going to say, and this is a plus of a franchise, right? This is the plus of the franchising, to have this in place in the succession planning.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is that they want you to have a plan. There's a lot of things that franchising will require of a business owner sooner than what an independent owner might do. They will just require it sooner. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, like Karen's saying.
Absolutely. Thank you all for helping. I appreciate you doing the panel of the pros with us today. And we're going to switch over to Jerry and talk about fighting for franchising and the franchisees in the IFA.
Hey, franchise owners. How's your local marketing? Do you feel like you could use some help keeping up with your social media posts and comments and reviews? Do you wonder if you could be doing more to attract local customers? Are you able to identify new move-ins to your local area? At Westvine, we help franchisees like you reach more local customers through digital marketing. With daily monitoring, creative content, and ad placement, and customer data intelligence, we'll get your business in front of the people who want your products or services. We also work with franchisors who need an agency to handle the digital marketing for all of their locations. If you're ready to reach more local customers, give us a call at 805-265-5440 or visit us at westvine.com. That's 805-265-5440 or westvine.com.
And welcome back. We have Jerry Akers here with us today. We're talking about fighting for franchising and IFAs the franchisees in the IFA. So Jerry, tell us what is going on with franchisees joining the IFA and what kinds of things that you think they're going to find to be so helpful being a part of that group now.
Yeah, well, education, of course, because in the franchise world, ongoing education is critical to success. And you can find it from a lot of different areas. Certainly your brand should be providing some of that and the peers that you have within your brand. But I find that the texture of what I get when I go out into the greater world and talk to other franchisees and other brands changes the way I look at everything. It changes my perception. So IFA will introduce you to all those things. So the educational thing, both on the ground, just regular straight up classes, but also the interaction with other franchisees. I find one of the biggest things is the interaction and engagement that they help facilitate in Washington, D.C. with our elected representatives, because there's a lot of decisions being made in D.C. related to franchising and our businesses by people who know nothing about franchising or our businesses.
Sure.
So I can tell you from many, many years of doing this, those elected representatives, they talk to lobbyists all day long and they take things lobbyists say with a grain of salt. But when somebody from their district shows up who owns a business that they've driven by or they've done business with, and you come in and say, hey, that bill you're talking about right now, here is exactly what it would do to my business. And that haircut you get would be more money, or, that sandwich you buy, we would have to change something with it, or my employees would take a hit because of X. Yeah. And so the engagement is critical. And I highly recommend everybody that's a franchisee, it's free. Join IFA. You'll get texts and emails on a regular basis with what's going on. They'll help set you up with that engagement piece with your reps. I find it kind of life-changing, to be very honest with you.
Well, it's interesting because we've kind of talked on this before, and I know that you're beginning to build kind of this curriculum for the franchisees. And obviously today's panel of the pros really gave me some insight to something that if it's not on your list of to-dos, maybe it should be talking about planning for second generations in businesses, right? And how do you get your business ready and planning for those unforeseen circumstances, making sure that if they haven't, none of my friends that own franchises and I have ever discussed making sure that our franchise agreement with the franchisor talks about what happens to my business if I pass in the middle of my term.
Well, I think there's a lot of people in that situation. Laura could certainly speak up on that later, maybe, but I would say the vast majority of franchise agreements have codicils in there that, the new owner has to be approved. And there's no guarantee your spouse or your children would be approved. They may not have the experience or the skill sets, or maybe, heaven forbid, they've created an issue somewhere along the line that the franchisor is aware of. Or, at some level, maybe the franchisor is going to be happy to be rid of your family. So you got to take all those things into consideration. And so it's critical. And I can tell you far too many stories where somebody thought they were going to live forever, and when they didn't, there were critical problems with the business. And B, where people thought they were going to be able to just pass it along to their spouse or kids, and suddenly, while they're dealing with a funeral and all those things, they discover their business is in limbo and may be sold if they don't get some approvals done.
Wow, really scary. Can you tell me what other kinds of things that you're working on with franchisees being involved in the IFA? What are some of the plans that your committee has in getting them active and again standing up and fighting? They're fighting for their being.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. So we, under the last chairman of the franchisee forum, we started a process where we're doing quarterly educational webinars put on by the experts, the Laura lists of the world, and so on. But we had one just a couple of days ago because of something being talked about in DC that could dramatically impact franchising and franchisees and so on. And so we already had it set up and scheduled. So they just opened it up to all franchisees, even if they weren't a part of IFA yet. So we're trying to educate them from a franchisee standpoint as to what's going on and the impact it would have. And it was amazing. We had, I think we had almost 100 people on that call, and half of them had not been involved in the past. And so then Jerry sends an email to all of them, thanking them and asking them to become engaged. And here's the reasons, which we just enumerated. And contact me directly if you want to talk about it. So that way we can continue to broaden the base of franchisees involved in this. Because, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. I kind of teased it. In Arkansas last year, there was a bill that was being considered, and it was on the fast track. It would have been voted on this week. It was voted on this week, now, to be honest with you. But and it was brought about by a large franchise system where the franchisees expected their children to be automatically approved. And when they found out that wasn't going to happen, they couldn't change the franchisor. That was locked in stone. So they went to the state and asked them to change the law. And unfortunately, some of the impetus behind this was legitimate, and I could see why they, might have thought that was a good path. I would have negotiated with the franchisor and spent more time on that side, but sure. But I get it, going to your representative and so on. But unfortunately, when you turn representatives loose on something like that, they go crazy. Yes. And it went far beyond what they had originally set out to do. And some of the things that they were going to put in there were going to make it extremely difficult for franchisors to be in business in Arkansas. So we got the franchisee group together. IFA did a great job of bringing people together, and franchisees in Arkansas spoke directly in the House to the representatives. There were, 70 or 80 franchise systems around the country that sent letters to the House to talk about that. And we were able to negotiate then and get it to fill the bill of what the franchisors were concerned about, but yet not all the other ancillary stuff that was thrown into it.
Sure. Well, and so here we go, right? It goes back to the advice that Laura gave, making sure that you initially at least get that one-on-one conversation going. If you think you're going to want to, give it to your kids, get them involved. And then it sounds like the advice you're giving is before you jump necessarily to the state level with something like this, try to really work directly with the franchisor to see if there isn't some common ground you can come to before it potentially affects everyone.
Well, sure. Getting Laura or somebody that does what Laura does involved in a conversation with you or your franchisee association, if that's what it is, and the franchisor. Many times you can negotiate some of those things out. It's far less painful, generally will cost you less money, take less time. And maybe the biggest thing is you don't ruin relationships, which can haunt a family forever when you're in a franchise system. So yeah, I highly suggest that people be cognizant of that and talk to their franchisor early on. And, I'm also involved in NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business.
Thank you. Yes.
Literally for the same reasons, except they're stronger on the state level. IFA is stronger on the federal level. Okay. So I got back from DC from testifying in front of a House committee. And 3 or 4 days later, I was in the state capitol here testifying in front of a House committee at the state level about staffing and employment and those kinds of things. And they want to hear from business owners because they know, well, frankly, they can see from the tax income right now that we're all struggling.
Yeah.
And so they want to know what they can do to fix it. So I talk about the same things everywhere I go. Help with daycare, because so many moms can't work or can only work part-time. They'd love to work full-time, but can't. Okay. Keep your regulations under control. So I or other franchisee or business owner can do more for their employees to keep them employed. There's just a list of those kinds of things that I think are very common sense that get overlooked. So that was my thing last week. I hope nothing is coming up this next week where I'm going to be in front of anybody.
So here's a final question for you, Jerry. NFIB, obviously more independent businesses involved in there, but can franchisees become a part of the NFIB as well?
Absolutely. I am. There are many in the state of Iowa, I'm sure, around the country that are. And I use IFA and NFIB only almost together, that as uniformly. In fact, when I was in DC, IFA reached out to NFIB knowing that I'm a member and let them put some questions in and let them have access to everything that we were doing to use for their social media and all the things that they're doing, because it works both ways. So absolutely, I highly suggest it. Again, it gives you a bigger presence on the state level. It gives you a different level of education because they look at it in a little more global standpoint rather than just franchising, but all of that global stuff impacts your business too. So I would suggest both of those organizations are on your to-do list.
Well, Jerry, I want to thank you for being such a great contributor to the show, and also for being such an advocate really for franchises all over. And I hope that, a lot of listeners out there who are franchisees today, if they're not part of IFA and NFIB, that they really take a look at it and consider getting involved. Because listen, nobody's going to have your back or fight for you more than you will for yourself. So if it's not important to you, well, hey, then it is what it is. But if all the hard work, blood, sweat, and tears that you put into it, money you've invested means anything, you've got to get involved. Otherwise, you just become a victim, right?
100%. Thank you, Kristin.
You're welcome, Jerry. Thank you. And on to our next section. What are the top 3 reasons that you should tune in to Pillars of Franchising? 1, franchise advice from a $1 million mentoring team. And 2, how about interviews from franchise professionals and influencers? And number 3, how about getting some professional tips on buying, growing, and exiting your franchise? Join us on Pillars of Franchising to learn about the secrets of franchising success. You can find us at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll get that re-recorded one of these days, Karen.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, well, it was a lot of fun anyway. So listen, I want to know, you serve as kind of a consultant for a lot of these franchise systems, right?
Well, I played different roles. I was, as I mentioned before, on, franchise on the franchisor side, and then now work with different franchisees, people that are buying franchises or people that have existing franchises.
Yeah. So what are some of the top questions that people have?
What I thought I would do is share maybe 3 questions that are kind of not common questions or not commonly talked about. So if you think about the first one, we've talked a lot about this one. Many times what happens is that, someone's going to sell their franchise. And for many of you that are listening today, you're like, I want to buy a franchise. So then the question is, do I keep that franchisee that's selling the franchise? Do I keep them on for a while? Do I not? What kind of, how should I do this? Because they're trying to do the right thing and they're worried. They're like, do you think it's going to be good if I actually keep this person on for a long time because they can help me with the transition?
That's a really good point. And the same would go, I would think, like for the office staff, right? Like, do I want to keep their office staff or do I need to work on bringing my own in? And what is the right time? So how do you answer that question?
Well, first of all, it's always, it depends, because it does depend, right? It depends upon, first of all, we'll start with, do you even like the person you're buying it from? Right? I mean, think about
how the negotiations go, right?
Exactly. You can tell. And if you don't like them, and if you feel like you're not connected to them, it's a hard get them out as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Because I've seen when people have not liked someone, I've been in the middle of that, where there are people, there's the existing franchisee that just bought and the older one, and they're fighting. And that is so not good. That's very undermining. So that's the first thing. Do you like them? Second would be making sure that if you say yes, and that you'd like to have them on board, first of all, making sure that you agree on what they're going to do. What's the accountability? If you don't put that in place, the parameters in place, they then think they still own the franchise. Then they start doing things they shouldn't be doing. Then you get battles, right? You get battles there. Also, what happens is if you don't put a time frame on it, then it could go on and on and on. So it depends is really think through, do you like them?
Yeah.
Do you, if you do, think about the time frame, think about what they're going to be accountable for, and making sure that they don't undermine you.
And, I think also, I certainly would look at it as, were they a successful franchisee, or are they selling because they're struggling, right? Because if they're selling because they're struggling, I'm probably going to vote to move them along.
100%, 100%. Right. And you've got to know that even in taking a look at when you're looking at the business, you'll see that. You'll see some of these things. And if you have any yellow or red flags, the advice is, probably not to do it, because it's going to cause you more harm than good. And you'll figure it out. And you have a good franchisor usually who has a team of people that can help you with that transition.
Right. Excellent. Okay, great. What's your number 2?
Okay, so the number 2 that I always get is, a lot of times the franchisors will say, here, take a look. Here's a list of people, other franchisees that you can talk with. Yes. And so it's usually one is what, do I really need to do that? Or if they do it, they're like, well, what kinds of questions do I ask?
Right.
Right. And so many times what happens is they'll have these calls with the designated list of franchisees, and it's almost like a happy conversation, right? They kind of say the same things about marketing or sales, and it's happy. So the advice I give is yes, you need to be talking to other franchisees. And talk to the list of people, and also talk to people that aren't on the list.
Yes.
Try to find some, right? Don't you think? Try to find some that you can, whether it's the web, people that are near you, people that might be the same size as you.
Yeah.
Buy them a cup of coffee or have a virtual call with them, and ask some hard questions.
That's a great point, because I called some people who were not on the list. The first thing I said was, I know why they're not on the list.
Okay, that's funny. But then there's some that aren't on the list because they give some really candid answers too, right?
Yeah, and inappropriate ones too, to boot.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you really telling me this? Stop! If you can't be saying this, you have no idea who I am.
Yeah. But I even think for the ones that are on the designated list, if it's all these nice questions, you're going to get, because they're on the list for a reason, right? They're compliant. Exactly. They're going to give you nice answers. So I also suggest asking some hard questions. Things like, if you had to do it over again, what would you change?
Absolutely. Yep.
And and I could think of more, but really think through ones that are hard questions where you're going to really get at the culture, the relationship with the franchisor. How are decisions made? How are the franchisees? Really getting at some of that by asking harder questions, and then the regular traditional ones.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think what that process is, what we refer to that, right, is validating.
Yes.
And I think what's really good to validate is, let's say, whatever category it is that you're looking to invest in, also talk, there's some things that maybe you don't really like the answers on. Talk to some of the competitors and see how they answer those questions, because you might be led to a different brand because what are red flags with one brand, the other brand has figured out.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because don't you you want to see the good, bad, and ugly. You want to see that.
Yeah.
And I think having your eyes wide open with it and saying, okay, I'm so in love with this brand, right? That many times you'll ignore some red flags.
Yes.
So it's because, it is an emotional buy a little bit. So you're saying take a step back and maybe look at other brands, take a look at some different things, you know, in this validation process as well.
Yep, absolutely. And what's number 3?
Okay, well, number 3 is one we keep talking about today. So it's interesting. There's a theme here. How many times do people say, do I really need to have an attorney? Do I really need to have that or not? You know, or I'm just going to get my attorney that I use for my house. I bought my house and I'm just going to use them. I'm not kidding you. You have no idea how many times that happens. And the answer is yes, use an attorney. And Laura, this is a big plug for you. And use someone who understands franchising, who can go through that, you know, the whole the contract and explain it to you. Because how many times do you know people that are like, well, I didn't know that was in the contract?
Yep. Well, and I'll tell you, you know, if you just call an attorney and say, oh, I've got this franchise agreement, I need somebody to review. Can you review it for me? And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. You might want to, instead of ask the way I did, can you talk about the experience you have with franchise agreements and franchises in general, right? Yes. I think this guy said to me, well, it can't be that hard. And of course, I've seen him before. And I was like, okay, whatever. So we went forward with it. And the guy, you know, spends time with it and then says to me, well, I don't think there's really much you can change here.
Right.
Like,
right. And
okay, here's your $250.
because you want your attorney asking you hard questions, having you understand what you're buying. You might want to go back and ask this question. What about that? So they're really giving you advice, not just looking at it and saying yay or nay.
Yeah.
And really involving them. That to me, that's the beginning step of actually having a relationship with a franchise attorney, because you're going to need them on many occasions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Karen. So it's great to have a top 3. Do you want to just rattle off the top 3 issues again?
All right. So number one would be making sure that, you know, do you keep your existing franchisee or not in the transition? And that it depends, a lot of different factors, but think about it. The second one is it worth talking to other franchisees before I am buying? And the third one is, do I really need this attorney? Do I need this lawyer to actually help me with this?
Awesome. Very good. Thank you so much. We appreciate all your insight each and every week. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next Thursday.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks. Laura.
Hello again. I didn't know this episode was going to be such a lawyer plug. I feel honored.
I know, right? You've done such a great job, and everything we've talked about, oddly enough, just keeps coming back around to needing.
It's almost like lawyers are relevant. I don't know.
Well, listen, and the funny thing is, everyone goes, oh, my God, a lawyer, right? But in this case, you can't go it alone. It's just too critical. So let's talk about some of the legal advantages that you see, because you also have regular businesses, right? Independent businesses. What do you think are some of the biggest advantages with a franchise business?
Well, one is that it is actually a regulated industry, right? When you buy an independent business, you are doing a lot of your own due diligence. And that's not to say that you don't do, you know, a lot. It will feel like a lot even when you're buying a franchise. But when you are on your own, you're buying an independent business, there's probably no other business just like theirs to check against and say, well, okay, what is this? What am I doing? How is it going to be? And the fact that it's a regulated industry means that there is a regulated form of sale document, the franchise disclosure document, FDD, as you've heard people say. So that's a big one, right? You know, it's also regulated in the sense that, you know, a lot of different states across the country, they have a lot of rules around how to sell franchises and, you know, waiting periods and things that are really designed to be a consumer protection. That you are buying or starting an independent business, there is nothing like that. So one of them is just the fact that it's a regulated industry. Second, I would say, is that usually there are going to be others out there who are doing what you're doing. It could be, I suppose, there are some very new franchise startup systems, right? Where, you know, it has to go first. But most of the time, most franchises are a little bit more established than that. And that means that there are other folks out there to call who are doing just what you're doing. Maybe they're doing it, you know, in Topeka or in San Jose or something, but they are doing what you want to be doing. And that is incredibly valuable. To do those calls the way that you and Karen were just talking about. I do encourage all of my franchisee clients to call as many franchisees as you can. Yes, start with the list that you get from the franchisor. That's very nice.
Right.
But I really think that they need to call a lot of the other ones. And you have to call a lot. I think I've probably said this on here before, but it's like, 1/3 of them will, probably not call you back.
Right.
Which is fine. People are busy. 1/3 of them will not tell you anything new, right? The sky is blue and, grass is green. And then the other 1/3 is where you're going to actually find people who will give you really good information, who will sit with you. I encourage my people, if there's anyone, even if it's like, I was on the phone, I think it was a week or two ago with someone who's buying a franchise in the Chicago area. And the closest franchisee was like down in Indianapolis, which is, if you're not from this area, probably like a 5-hour drive. I was like, honestly, you need to call them. You need to make a lunch appointment, take them to lunch, and, make it worth their while to talk to you.
Exactly.
Because you're going to learn a lot more, especially if you go in person than just on the phone when they're distracted, they're checking email, they're, like how all of us do. You can also go and see their business. It's just valuable, right? To see it in person and make sure that, what you think you're buying is what they're actually operating, right? Because get into it and it's not, that's going to be a real disappointment.
Well, I think that's really important too, if you're looking at a resale, right? And there's a lot of people looking for resales right now because when you make that investment, you already have cash flow, right? And so we have looked at an existing business and it just told volumes. So even if I really liked the brand, the only option I had in this area was a resale.
Yeah.
And
the resale
walking in,
great, but if they're not, why suddenly someone's trying to get out.
Yeah. Well, his numbers and his story sounded real good. And you walked in the office and you just went. And my first thought was there's nowhere to go but up. Right.
That's a fair point. There are a lot of people who come into those as they're going to buy it on the cheap. Right.
Yeah.
And they feel that they can turn it around, that they, can be a better operator. And, that can be a very successful strategy. But you got to be really confident. Doing that on a first one, like if you didn't already have the experience that you have, or that Jerry has, or Karen, or someone, I don't know if I would suggest that for someone who is new to franchising. To buy one that's underperforming and try and say you're going to flip it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. As you said, we've had a very legal heavy show today. But I think it's been great, and there's been so much really great information. I appreciate you jumping in and contributing. And as always, we really enjoy having you on the show, being our legal expert with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'd like to thank you all for joining us on the show today. And thank you to our $1 Million Mentors for their continued commitment and thoughts. And a heartfelt warm welcome to Sarah Spain with Molly Maid of Aurora. And last but not least, a shout out of thanks to our producer, Fred McMurray. I am Kristin Selmeczy, your 4th franchising mentor, and together we are your resource for franchising success. This has been another episode of Pillars of Franchising, and please join us again next week at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. And remember, the dream starts here. Have a great week.
Franchising.